Nutrimedical Report. We have a remarkable, amazing Professor James McCanney here, teaches us many new things in Tier 1 science. And Professor James, we want to talk about a number of important topics. One of your main ones you do on your own radio show every week is talking about alternative energy. I'd like to also touch on the topics of CERN. Recently it crashed at the same time as the earthquake struck Nepal. What are the goals of CERN? We talked about this a little bit yesterday when we had J.D. Moore on. The solar and galactic activities, including the change in the spectrum of the sun, nearer space objects, and the approach of the dwarf star or Planet X that we talked about previously, and the evidence of that. Lots of different topics. Which ones would you like to start with? Professor James, we are waiting for you. Right?
Yes, I just I got back on. I'm here now. Let's try this.
Good. So tell us, which topics would you like to cover today? Did you hear what the list that I mentioned there, that long list?
No.
Okay, let me start again. That's okay. Well, hopefully you'll not be faded out. We talked about alternative energy, space weather, the approach of Planet X, the change in the spectrum of the sun, the idea of peak oxygen, all kinds of different topics. Which ones would you like to talk about today that are kind of apropos of your current newsletters, your books, and a lot of topics that are going on? Of course, the federal government, U.S. government, crazy idea of carbon credits, etc., and a CO2 economy, which is insane because it'll actually cause problems that'll amplify the crash of food supply and the destruction of the planet. Let's maybe start with alternative energy. That's an area that I think is very important for you.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned, just to begin with, a project, was it in Sweden, where they're working on hydrogen?
It's Uppsala University in Stockholm. They have actually a genetically altered algae that generates hydrogen from sunlight. And the whole idea would be to marry a hydrogen-based algae with a compressor and use a fuel cell or store it as a fuel in an adsorbing tank, so it doesn't become a Hindenburg effect. And we have these absorbing tanks right now. They're very available. So we could use hydrogen fuel for our homes and cars. We could use hydrogen fuel cells for generating power, and we could have simply a simple compressor system taking hydrogen from tubes that are literally hanging in the sunlight of algae generating hydrogen. Pretty simple. You just take water and it splits it to make hydrogen.
All of these are wonderful textbook ideas. You could draw pictures and it looks good and makes you feel good, but the real result, I have one litmus test that I use for any alternative energy project.
Right.
That is, can it replace 100% our current centralized coal, nuclear, and oil-powered energy systems? And that includes gasoline and oil for cars, diesel. Can you provide? And the answer with that system is simply no. How much algae would you have to grow? I'm probably sure, although I'd have to check, that it's not as efficient as, say, solar panels, which you can put in a flat plate. You don't have to worry about them growing. The energy is direct. It's
what
not
about these?
something
What about these solar reflectors? The Israelis had a lab here in Southern California over the last decade, and they have these solar concentrators that concentrate on a super efficient solar converter that not only generates hot water, but also generates a tremendous amount of power. These little tiny panels at the center of the focal point of these reflectors, parabolic reflectors, are another technology. What do you think of those type?
Once again, ask the simple question: are you going to replace the entire? First of all, those are very expensive facilities. They only work when the sun is out. There's a lot of mechanical mechanisms to keep the sun reflecting off all of the mirrors, the bank of mirrors, onto the central point. So it's a kind of a high maintenance type of thing, but how much energy are you going to get out of that relative to our total energy needs?
Right.
And the answer is you couldn't build enough of them to make a dent in our energy needs. And so, once again, here's the problem with any alternative energy. our entire grid is set up on the premise of centralized power, where they control
Right.
the voltage. And this is what I call the unspoken war, the war over who controls the voltage. Nobody, well, except me, talks about that particular topic. And
Yeah.
as long as right now solar is making a run for their money, and that's what it is. It's a run for money because they're going to make a lot of money off of Elon Musk and his Sun Solar company and the new Elon Musk Tesla lithium-ion batteries for the home. I just did a show on this, or my show coming up. I've done many shows on alternative energy.
Right.
But for example, that battery pack is a 7 or 10 kilowatt hour battery pack, which is a pretty good sized battery pack if you're dealing with, say, lead acid batteries or something like that. Cost around $7,000 to $10,000 retail. What can that do for your home power needs? The average house uses probably about 2,300 kilowatt hours per day. I'm sorry, about 1,100 kilowatt hours per day. And so, I mean, this is going to run your house for about 4 hours. And so the whole concept is somebody would buy this to store off-peak power at lower price and then use it during higher peak hours of electric usage.
Right.
But the end result is really, I mean, where's the payback? You would be 25 years before you would realize the payback. So even a rich guy isn't going to do this. If you put solar panels on your house to provide your house with the average household use, which is 11,000 kilowatt hours per year,
Right.
you would need 400 watt panels on your roof, and that could conceivably, in a climate like California or Arizona, conceivably could provide you with all of your energy needs.
Right.
But when you put that up, the guy next door who didn't happen to have $50,000 to put into a 400 watt panels, an inverter, and a control system and battery pack, his rates are going to go up because you're not contributing to the central power plant, whose operating costs are the same. So where is
and the grid
logic?
and the grid itself. Yeah.
Yeah, now the guy with the 40 panels, if he's off for the day and there's no air conditioning running, he's going to want to sell his power back to the grid. And so let's take the example, 10 o'clock in the morning, it starts to storm in Arizona or California. Okay, so we got a storm going on, but it's a hot day. So the coal and the nuclear power plants are powered up and they're running at full bore, trying to keep everybody's house cool on this hot summer day. And all of a sudden, about midday, the sun comes out and you've got 40,000 houses with the battery packs and the solar power coming online. And what do they start doing? They start dumping all this energy back into the grid. What are you going to run in with a garden hose into that coal-operated plant or that nuclear plant and try and cool it down?
Yeah, in fact, I did this study last year, and I referred to it on the show before at other times, that they discovered in California and other states when they have this grid, as it currently is, I call it the Haitian tar paper grid, which is basically the same level of construction. It's out of date and post-geriatric. They discovered that the transient surges caused by solar and wind power will blow the grid to pieces.
Oh, yeah.
And they in fact, they can't even take the mandate of how many homes have to. They're supposed to generate 20% of the power here in California by solar and wind. If they did that, the grid would be destroyed. And we're talking about without cyber terrorism, without a CME from the sun, without a gamma burst from the galaxy, it's gone. Without just solar panels. Welcome back. You've got some really good issues here, Professor McKinney. And of course, we mentioned this as a prepper that one of the things that people aren't aware of is that the backup power is available in all Western nations for supplying water supply. There's no backup power for sewage. So by the fourth day, they actually have to stop. They have to start cutting back water supplies to cities across the Western world, the United States, Canada, and New Zealand, everywhere, including Mexico City, because they don't have backup power for sewage treatment. And it'll mean that the sewage will back up in people's homes. The alternative power, literally, and this is what I saw from the study last year, because I talked to people here in California and experts on it, is that the grid is not going to survive alternative energy. They have to have a national plan with a new type of grid, a new type of alternative energy. As you say, nuclear fusion energy is something the Chinese have announced. You've talked about wind generating a giant, basically very reliable, very low maintenance kind of wind power. And he said, I think he said 1,000 of them would generate enough power to completely replace coal and everything else in the United States. Yeah. They'd be roughly 1,000 feet high, but they would generate all the wind power you needed in order to power everything, right?
And that would continue on forever, and it's literally free once you put in the initial investment. And the idea also is you need distributed voltage control. In other words, the wind generators simply dump energy into the grid, and it flows. If you have more wind in San Diego than New York, there's a flow of energy in that direction. And it doesn't matter if there's 150 volts on the grid or 72, because at the end station is where they rectify and set the voltage at your house right. or the local community, maybe 10 houses. And that's right. all controlled. It's going to be a much better system now. But it's like the whole concept of distributed computing. Back in the legacy IBM mainframe day, if you typed one letter, that information went to the central computer, and then it put a signal back on your screen and put the letter back on your screen. That was how centralized computing was back in the old days. Then they became more intelligent. They had the IBM 3270 intelligent terminal, which would store a certain amount of information and then upload that all at once to the mainframe. And then eventually came the personalized computer, which did a lot of things, and maybe only at the end of the day did some uploads to the mainframe. But the idea is that as the mainframe lost control of every little thing that happened, see, with the smart grid, what do they want to do? They want to tell you if you can turn your toaster on or not.
We had Dr. Olio Hansen from the Swedish Institute, and the board there actually tried to remove him and kick him out of his studios and his research facilities at the Karolinska in Stockholm, which is the largest and the oldest for electropollution in the world. And the reason is the Swedish government didn't want him to kind of blow the whistle, that they were, by putting smart grid, causing switching mode power supplies, which entrains human tissue and causes damage to bees and humans and other life forms, trees even. And what happened is, of course, that in Sweden, he mentioned this, we had an actual case we quoted, where a woman was given a notice that she was not going to be able to do her laundry until after 10 p.m. to optimally after midnight. That they literally remotely shut off her washer and dryer, because they have that with a smart chip in the smart appliances. They're not so smart. They actually have control over your appliances. So if they say, you can't do your washing now, you can't turn it on. You have to call the utility, and they have the access to the activation code to allow you to turn on your washer and dryer at certain times, that the machine will be available for you to use it. And that's already happening in Europe. This is what's going on, that craziness that's happening in Europe. And what it is trying to smooth out the power usage curve by forcing users to use it at times that are extremely inconvenient.
Right. Now, how are you going to put an automobile on that? Or, the 2 or 3 family cars. I mentioned at the beginning of the show, 11,000 kilowatt hours per year is the average family residential usage per year. A facility like Walmart's, a big box store, uses 1,000 times that. But let's go back to the house. Right now, that only counts your air conditioning and the fan on your furnace, or if you have electric heat, or the washing machine, the television, etc., and some lighting, whatever you use. Now throw in 2 or 3 family cars that are electric. Oh, okay, boys and girls. The reason that the power companies are backing Elon Musk's concept of putting a battery pack in every house, or in many houses, is because that keeps them in control, and they're just chomping, they're salivating at the bit, just imagining that all of a sudden they're going to be providing energy for cars instead of the big oil companies. Now,
Right.
the problem is that we're not set up for that, and the power companies are having trouble providing the power we need now. Double, triple, or quadruple that 11,000 kilowatt hour per year rating, and I mean, where are we going to go? So the guy that bought the 400 watt solar panels for his roof, which now powers his house, and he goes out and he buys his new Tesla sedan. He comes home and realizes now instead of 40 400 watt panels, he now needs 120, and he doesn't have room on his roof for that many solar panels. And his actuator and his inverter and the other battery packs that he bought are not sufficient, and so he has to rely on the central power company to provide him power to charge up his car at night. You know, there's no plan here, is what I'm saying.
Right. In fact, I had a neighbor who rushed ahead and got solar panels. He's got a tremendous amount on his roof. And I looked at it and I thought, if you have solar panels that are connected to the grid and the power goes out, you have no power. And if you put battery packs, they're incredibly expensive.
Right.
So how do you respond to that? I mean, I've thought of novel ways of storing power, like if you had solar hydrogen, if it was very efficient, or if you had other kinds of batteries, like a kinetic battery, that kind of thing.
Yeah, but I've been through all of this. If you want to store energy, here's an example. I have some off-the-cuff examples.
Right.
Take the energy stored in a single deep cycle, industrial deep cycle, 12-volt battery. About let's
like
say,
a marine battery, or even the Edison battery, which is a nickel metal hydride type of battery.
Sure. Well, let's take 220 amp hours of energy.
Right.
Now let's compare that to a gravitational system. If you took a 1-ton car, automobile, and you had a 600-foot cliff, you extended an arm out, and you dropped down and you ran through a generator, the energy of dropping that car down 600 feet. This is a 1-ton car or block of metal, whatever.
Right.
Okay. Now, that's great, but you have to raise that car up now by some other means to get it up to the top. But you want to know how much energy you gained by dropping that car? The same amount of power that's in that one battery. If you look at the inefficiencies and the other conversions. So buy a battery is the moral of the story. You know, kinetic energy conversion systems are very inefficient, and they're very big and bulky for the amount of energy you get.
Exactly. Now, the one that I've heard that is the best is a company that's refurbishing the old Edison battery, which, by the way, I heard that the one project that Edison made the most money on was Edison batteries, more than light bulbs or anything else. And for mining operations, for major heavy equipment, for remote operations. And this company, ZapWorks, up in Montana, is refurbishing those. So they're extremely expensive, though. You can get a smaller battery for like $40,000 and a big one for, $70,000, $100,000. But they're enormously expensive to have these deep cycle batteries that last 100 years or more. Back in a moment with Professor McKay. And welcome back. And so you had some interesting things in the break. You mentioned how you can actually break off the sulfur off the old lead acid batteries. The ZapWorks are way too expensive, I thought. And one of the things is, if you can store power efficiently and at a reasonable cost, and these batteries last a long time, then I think that we need a combination of things. We should have a new type of grid. One of the things that I've talked to power experts is we shouldn't be using power towers with the old style, AC kind of boosting the power every so many miles across the country. We could have it converted our power to a form of plasma, and have plasma distribution lines laid underground across the country, which would be much more efficient and would be free from weather. And we should have it so it's not it's basically a distributed grid. In other words, there's little nodes that can, in a sense, be independent if they need to break off from the grid if there's a major surge from a nuclear power plant going hot, or a coronal mass ejection or cyber terrorism hit, that you can literally dissect away the other areas and they can be independent. But we need to have an intelligent grid that can reorganize, and what we have right now is not an intelligent grid, is it?
No. There's a way, one plan that I had with my wing generator technology was to simply use the grid as it's currently set up. What happens is you have basically diodes between the grid elements, and that's what keeps, say, a hot grid element from destroying another one, is that the diodes. But it also allows the current to flow in the direction where there's more energy and more electricity, more voltage on one element. It will flow out into the other grid element. So it's actually a self-adjusting design. And what I was doing is I said you put the wing generators, which are very efficient, 500 megawatt systems to gigawatt systems, and you put these around the country, and they simply dump the energy onto the grid. The control, the voltage control, and which is what you control the powers to the house. The house is expecting 110 volts. You control that locally, either at the house or for a group of 10 houses, let's say. And it doesn't matter what the voltage on the grid is. And so this is why I'm saying we need an intelligent plan. We need engineers, not presidents, not politics, not Elon Musk, to come in and make a design. I mean, what they're doing now, selling solar panels willy-nilly and trying to make a sale, basically make money, they're trying to sell this as it's going to cure our problem. They got Greenpeace in there,
they want to make it a kind of a cost celeb, and even making these batteries, and if they were talking about CO2, it generates more pollution and more CO2 making these fancy batteries they have, including Elon Musk's, and actually the CO2 from coal-fired generators. That's what I find really hilarious. If you actually calculate out the chemistry, if CO2 was a problem, which to be honest with you it isn't, what we need to do is reseed the benthic layer of the oceans and stop chopping down the rainforest, like in Brazil, so that they can recycle and create oxygen out of CO2. It's that simple. Then if you have scrubbers, for example, the coal-fired generators using coal from out in Colorado, most of the power generated in Colorado is coal-fired generators. Right. And what's amazing is with those scrubbers, all you have coming out of the vapor, because I was an occupational doctor there, is basically water vapor. You're not having heavy metals. You don't have pollution coming out of the top of them. They're clean as a driven snow, as you want to call it, literally, because they're scrubbed to the point where there is no pollution being shoved into the troposphere. So this idea that coal is so evil, you have there's ways of dealing with the sludge and so on, and you don't want to have chopping off the top of mountains or leaving giant slurry ponds. But there's ways of doing that. You could turn it into solid waste blocks and put it in the underground portion of old mines. There's lots of ways to recycle these materials and maybe use them for other things altogether.
Right, exactly. The one thing that I have tried to encourage is the use of high voltage, large capacitors, something like the size of your water, your hot water heater in your house. Right. A large high voltage capacity, just say you had 100,000 volt capacitor of that size, it would store a tremendous amount of energy, and then you'd have to break it down and to usable levels. But it could be made as a safe. I mean, we have many more dangerous things in our house than that. All of the alternative fuel sources, I don't agree with any of them. You were talking about hydrogen fuel. I don't agree with hydrogen at all. It's number one, it's not going to solve all of our energy needs. It's difficult to manage. And
if it ever got out to you, it might be a form of a mutant pollutant. They could literally start generating hydrogen in places you don't want it because it can be explosive.
Hydrogen is
my nephew. I'm sorry. Yeah, I have a nephew that actually is involved with the power corporation. I won't mention his name or his company, but up in Silicon Valley, and what they've been able to do is generate a large compressed air systems for storing hundreds of kilowatts. megawatts of power. And that seems to be, they started off with research years ago in trucks in Europe where they use compressed air to actually store the energy in a truck. And these big, really big trucks literally can run all day literally on compressed air. And it turns out that the efficient conversion back from compressed air to power is pretty efficient, better than batteries. And so from what I can see, when I talked to the company last year, this is a relative, first-degree relative, and the young person who developed this already had his PhD in nuclear physics by the time he was 18, so he was pretty smart. And when they developed this technology, which is being backed by major corporations and so on, it seems to be that they're selling to big corporations, but they're needing to see a sell to what I call a distributed network. In other words, what I see as a power grid network would be plasma lines crossing the country, a system like you mentioned where you literally dump power in and you control the voltage at the usage end. You don't want to generate electro pollution because the current power grid system is generating the return currents. About 80 to 90% of the return current doesn't return properly to the power plant, so it's literally creating electro pollution in the telluric currents in the ground, which are bad for living things. And it's also loses a lot of the power itself.
Yeah, a lot of tremendous power loss.
And if you could store it as compressed air in these giant compressors, they're already selling them. They've been selling them for the last few years. So a large corporation or power company can store a lot of their power on peak in these compressed air giant chambers that can store 200 or 300 megawatts of power. Not just little amounts we're talking about. And they can be put underground too, so you don't have to have above ground.
Right. But the other thing with storage of power, and there's kind of somewhat of a misnomer that you have to store all the power that you're going to use. And the reality is, somewhat of the concept of Musk's idea is that you store a bit, and then on the peak times you reuse that, and then you cycle back and forth. But in a real alternative energy scenario where you're getting all your energy from alternative sources like the wing generators, the idea is that the battery pack is there to help stabilize your voltage. And a battery pack with an inverter is an extremely stable source of voltage stabilization, if you see what I mean. So what you're really doing is you're stabilizing the voltage with the battery pack. Therefore, you don't run the battery pack as a energy source. You use it as a voltage stabilizer. And so if all of a sudden you turn on a big power drain like a power tool, the batteries are right there to take up the slack.
So in other words, some of the more efficient batteries married to something like a compressed air system and a new distributed power grid would solve that. Because I hear a lot of preppers, they want to have storage. They say, well, you might have a small battery pack you can get at Amazon and solar panels, but it's not going to solve your overall needs. The grid is a mess.
Right.
Discussion, Professor McCanny. And I think we're going to continue this to kind of develop as I say, the first level I found for power is to have a 20 kilowatt Generac generator with propane right now, and have some mobile solar panels. You can buy the little batteries at Amazon and some deep cycle batteries that you can literally wire. You can even actually have it set up in your power panels to have what I call an accessory power access. So you wire it so if the power goes out and you don't want to use your propane, you can just flip a switch and it'll just keep what we call essential things going with the solar panels and your deep cycle batteries, because you can just flip from regular mode to what I call Armageddon mode. There's no power.
Right.
You actually don't necessarily want to have all the lights on your house and everything going, because you're going to attract everybody for miles that doesn't have power and food, and their refrigerator's turned off, so everything's rotted, and by the fourth day there's no dog food, no food, and they're hungry, angry, and rabid, just like zombies. And so
the other thing I did was I split my electrical box in two halves. I've got the essential side on one side, and then I've got the non-essential things on the other side. So just by a flip of the switch, you are only running essential items.
Well, that's a smart idea. So if I redo my panels, I should just have them switch to different cables and say, here's the essential, here's the non-essential, and then when you flip it, you can actually have a bus to actually plug in your solar panels and your backup, deep cycle batteries, so you're all set.
Right. Yeah. The other thing about most generators today is they're split. If you buy a 10,000 watt generator, it's split into two 5,000 watt 120s. The 10,000 watt is either the combined two 120s, or
Right.
it's a 220. And so that's another way of splitting. You can put half of your system on one half of one of the output plugs and the other half on the other, and just by unplugging it, you all of a sudden you're just running on half of that generator. So you're not going to be running the full load. So you don't need your washing machine. You don't need other things.
Right.
Maybe a second refrigerator. You don't need, etc.
Now, we spent a lot of time on this today because I think if I was to predict what's happening, because basically the world economy, there's so many levers that can be controlled. Despite all these stories that we hear, I agree with Joel Skousen that the demise of the world economy and total crash is, much exaggerated. But real things, physical things like the power grid and power going out, that's almost certainty. In fact, just even trying to put alternative energy is going to make certain that the power grid is going to be gone, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and people are going to find this out the hard way, just like the Canadians found out after they invested billions of dollars in three-blade wind generators that they don't work. And what the public is going to find out is that they're buying a pig in a poke with the solar industry, because it's just going to make things worse until it breaks.
So solar is a good add-on if you're going to travel to go camping, or if you're in an Armageddon situation where you want power for computers or TV or communications. But just buy all the power needs. And the other thing is, and this kind of gets into space weather, which I maybe like the last few minutes. We haven't updated on what's going on with CERN and with space objects and the approach of they call it Nibiru or Planet X, which is really a dwarf star or a large planetoid object. What's your latest take on that? What's happening? Because we have the hyperelliptical comets that have come in. We've got some pretty significant evidence of gravity waves coming in from deep space. I took care of employees working on the SPT in Antarctica when I was in the mid-90s in Colorado Springs. And I became very familiar with highly classified information about the fact we have the Pi Meson scope down there, deep space, a multinational group that are looking at with X-ray telescopes like Chandra, and the X-ray and the infrared telescopes, the stereoscopic infrared telescopes for deep space observation, and of course also what's called the deep space torsion field assessment, which basically looks at deep space at gravitonic waves, which are faster than light waves from deep space that indicate an object's out there that's changing and coming into our from our outer to our inner solar system. And cataclysms happen. There's 10,000 dwarf stars for every star in the galaxies, which means there's an awful lot of them that aren't even entrained into an orbital pattern, even if it's hyperelliptical.
Right.
Periodic cataclysms are just part of the nature of our galaxy. I mean, it's not something unusual. This is standard stuff that this happens, right?
Well, it's part of the necessary. It's like a forest fire, which renews the forest. It's the same thing. It's what kicks evolution along. Without it, evolution would be very stagnant.
Well, in fact, if it wasn't for the asteroid, we wouldn't be. If it wasn't for the asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs, human beings wouldn't be on the planet.
Yeah, exactly. If it was an asteroid.
And I don't believe in evolution, but I believe in what I call progressive recreation. And
exactly.
Which is much what I call intelligent recreation, which I think is there's a great deal of evidence that evolution that's random by selection there's no evidence for it at all. But what I think happens is without these cataclysms, you couldn't have the planet cleared for the next level of creatures that would exist on it. And
right.
Even the mountain creating, for example, a lot of people don't understand what makes mountains. It has nothing to do with the typical mountain building things that they talk about. It has everything to do with periodic lithospheric disjunction between the crust of the earth and the mantle that creates mountains.
The only way that can happen is if something comes by the earth, something big in a gravitational wave. The tectonic plates, the whole idea of subduction and all of this, plates moving over each other, I mean, that's nice in a drawing in a textbook, but where are the Herculean forces that move these plates sideways? I mean,
right.
They don't exist.
Exactly.
Nobody can seem to explain that, even though the textbook drawings look swell. So what happens is a big comet comes by the nucleus, and it jars the mantle and the crust, moves them, and then right now we're in a relaxing period where these are relaxing and adjusting along the plate boundaries. That's why things are moving. It's not because the Earth did this by itself. If the Earth were 4.5 billion years old all by itself, the plates would simply separate and there would be no action at all.
Right. Yeah, so what you're saying basically is, and this is from my other classified and other sources, is that we've been watching the observations that go right back to that Danish astronomer, what was his name, that discovered the perturbations of Uranus. You probably remember him now. That's over 100 years ago. And he actually calculated with Newtonian physics that there must be a deep space object that was out there that approaches periodically that causes gravitonic perturbations of the orbits of Uranus and the other planets, Saturn. So what I have from my sources is, in fact, they know that with these hyperelliptical comets coming in, so the reason why the globalists are in such a panic to get their underground cities operation, buying so many bullets and so on, and why they bifurcated science literally almost a century ago. So most people don't realize Tier 1 science is completely separated from science that's taught in universities, is because they're going to try to hide in underground cities when this object passes so they can survive the cataclysms and the scorching of the planet as the radiation protection drops and the planet becomes under a period of, if you want to call it, judgment by fire. And the globalists are in a panic over this. That's why they want to get total control of the internet. They want to have total control of the world economy. They're literally not wanting to fix Fukushima Daiichi because they want to reduce the world population. And they want to basically a form of martial law everywhere. I mean, and it's not just in America, it's in every country on Earth. So people have to see the subtext of this is actually astrophysics. The astrophysics drives the globalists to do what they think is the right thing for them, because it's hard to get in their mind, but they actually think they're doing the right thing because they think civilization as they see it won't survive unless it's a small segment of civilization that uses super science and underground cities and off-world space platforms to survive what's coming.
Exactly. That's a good summary.
We need to get back on. You can. I hope you can make it again on Friday. We were lucky we got you on today. That was awesome. Especially talking about energy. It's a big deal. It's, I think, other than water, energy is next after water, because if you have energy and water, you can have food. Food's easy once you have energy and water, right?
Great. Exactly.
Amazing program today, Professor McCanny. We'll have you back on Friday and have our scientist Ann Morris. And by the way, she's going to soon have a blog available too. And I want to put a direct link up to your site and your show too on our main page, so people can go directly across and listen to your show and check out your books and materials. Because you are the only one I know that talks openly about Tier 1 science that can back it up. Thank you. See you again on Friday.
Thanks, Dr. Bill.
Take care.
Berkey.com, home of the Berkey Guy.